it is my pleasure to have the opportunity to have a conversation with the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense, Ms. Dalton from the Office of Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities.
It's great to join you here today, Ryan. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Secretary Dalton, if you don't mind, could we start with just a quick overview for our members in terms of the office that you're managing, the Office of Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities? What is the role of that office within the Department of Defense? What's kind of the scope of responsibility that your team is in charge of?
Absolutely. So we provide civilian oversight of the crafting of the national defense strategy, ensuring that it's in alignment with the overall national security strategy of the U.S. government. We also oversee war plans development for the Department of Defense, as well as oversight of our global force posture. So the way that our military is arrayed around the globe to support certain missions that are important for our national security objectives. We ensure that those forces are in alignment with our strategic goals. And we also oversee the development and deployment of nuclear and missile defense forces, as well as security cooperation with allies and partners around the globe.
So we're excited about the opportunity to speak with you about sustainability and climate change in particular. How is climate change strategically relevant for the Department of Defense, and specifically in terms of your team and your office?
So it's actually a really exciting time to be working on the development of our national defense strategy at a point where this administration, the Biden administration, has placed such a priority on climate. It's a priority for the president. It's a priority for our Secretary of Defense, Austin. He has actually noted that climate change is making the world more unsafe, and we need to act. So there's that sense of urgency and really an imperative to drive through the development of the National Defense Strategy, which we are currently working on and is due to come out to meet our congressional reporting requirements in early January of 2022. We are also hard at work on implementing the president's executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, and essentially looking at 4 different areas in that regard in terms of our DoD infrastructure abroad, our basing, and the cooperative agreements that we have with allies and partners. We're also looking at risk mitigation for our installations, both at home and abroad for our military. We're working on partner engagement when it comes to climate. And also we are conducting an assessment of risk to look at the effects of climate change over time and how that may impact our ability to fulfill our specific defense objectives in support of the national security strategy.
So, Secretary, it sounds like similar to our member organizations in the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, there is a focus on environmental sustainability, reducing cost of operations, and in particular, it sounds like resiliency is really a key focus area of the Pentagon in terms of confronting climate change. Do you think any one area of ESG or sustainability gets the lion's share of attention within the Department of Defense in your office, or is it really a diverse approach in terms of thinking through the impact of climate change and how it can affect our forces?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really all of those things, in thinking about the future security environment and understanding we really are factoring in the dynamics of climate and how that can actually exacerbate existing conflict drivers in terms of shaping migration patterns across the globe and even here into the United States. So, there's that assessment and planning feature that's really important. And then, when it comes to what do you do about it, how do you change your operations, your investments, in building that sense of resiliency from an installation perspective, but also from a forces perspective, in terms of being adaptable over time to operating in rapidly changing conditions. So it's really, I think, across the spectrum of those different factors that we are working along and trying to plan towards.
So, Secretary Dalton, when you think about climate change, from your perspective or your office's perspective, is climate change a new national security threat, or does climate change increase or exacerbate the risk of existing national security threats?
It's what I think is new is the elevation of this consideration in the relative priorities that we are placing within the security environment and what we have to plan and operate for as a military and as a department. So in that sense, I think there's a sense of urgency and importance that perhaps was not there previously in the conception of what's important from a national security perspective. And then I think, in terms of how we're approaching that and thinking about it conceptually, it's really a transnational issue, shared global challenge that knows no geographic bounds, and the impacts on any given region around the world are going to have very specific implications for those particular regions. But we may also be able to lift up to kind of a common level of understanding in terms of what the shared challenges might be. So I think the impacts on migration really pop out as a shared challenge that you see across different regions, where you may have extant drivers of conflict, let's say, in Central America, in Africa, in the Middle East, and compounded by water and food scarcity. And then you layer on top of that the effects of climate change that may exacerbate some of that scarcity, and how that can actually enhance a competition for resources over time, and compel families, individuals to think about taking a dangerous path away from where they are currently struggling, and to try to find better opportunities elsewhere, I think is contributing to unprecedented global migration patterns that will continue to shape our geopolitics, will continue to shape elections potentially. I mean, I think we saw in the Syria crisis just a few years ago, in part driven by some of these concerns about water and food scarcity, that mass migration to Europe, and how that shaped some of the electoral outcomes there. In very significant ways. So, these are all factors that we are assessing as part of our survey of the security environment, and will directly inform the development of our national defense strategy.
So do you think we're already entering into an era where the way U.S. forces are deployed and the manner in which they're operating, that they're being directly impacted by climate change? For example, in the Middle East, or with new shipping routes potentially opening up in the Arctic with the loss of sea ice, or extreme weather with hurricanes and typhoons, for example.
Yes. So just to pick up on a couple of those great examples, where you left off, domestically at home, we have seen the impact of hurricanes at places like Camp Lejeune. We've seen the flooding in the Midwest directly impacting some of our air bases there. These are very real and intangible effects that unfortunately have undercut our ability to train and operate out of some of these key locations. So I think in many ways DoD has been pushing in the interagency for more thinking along these lines, and has been a leader in some respects in trying to think ahead of some of these impacts. When it comes to the Arctic. I think, a confluence of factors coming together with the climate indicators on top of that. I think, some of the latest NOAA projections indicate that it's actually going to be an exponential effect as you look out over the next 10 to 15 years. And so, what are the implications for greater ability for both the United States, its allies, but also its adversaries to have, more common passage through those waterways? What opportunities does that create for global commerce, global transit? But, how does that enhance the ability of, probably Russia principally in this case, to project its power into that region? There are also significant rare earth minerals at the top of the world that will increasingly have relevance as we lean into more climate friendly approaches. So an interesting intersection there as potentially becoming more of a competitive area for exploiting those types of resources. But as a consequence of climate, opening up the availability to access them at the same time.
Well, that's fascinating. Now, many of our member companies are already quite advanced in terms of their journey and their implementation of sustainability strategies. And one area where we're already seeing significant changes in terms of accountability and tracking. Is the U.S. military already making changes to the way it procures equipment and fuel, as you mentioned? Is there an interest in accounting for things like emissions or CO2 as a metric for sustainability within the Department of Defense?
Yeah, I think, look, it's a priority that our Secretary of Defense has made in terms of working closely with allies, in terms of working with the private sector to really push this agenda forward. So, at that level, DoD has already made a commitment to increasing the energy efficiency of our platforms and installations in terms of deploying clean distributed energy distribution and storage. And in terms of electrifying our own tactical vehicle fleet, that was part of actually our FY22 budget submission. So, I think there are some very concrete commitments that our secretary has made to advance this agenda, but it's only the beginning. There is so much work to do in this vein, given the stakes.
Can sustainability be an advantage in terms of recruiting and retaining the soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines of the 21st century?
I think so. Again, the U.S. military is a reflection of America, and I think if you look at polling of next generation Americans, they take climate change exceptionally seriously, as an existential crisis of our time. So as I think as you see, that next generation entering the U.S. military, there will be a sense of how important this is. Not only to the viability of our military, but also for our nation and its place in the world.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for the time, Secretary Dalton. On behalf of SPLG, we really appreciate the opportunity to engage in a conversation with the Office of Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities of the Department of Defense.
Great. Thanks so much for having me today, and really looking forward to building out DoD's partnership with you all and the private sector on this important issue set.